They laughed when she picked up a pencil. They laughed harder when she drew a single thin line across cold aluminum skin. No blueprints, no engines running, no explosions. Just a pencil line. And yet, within weeks, fighters were falling out of the sky, bombers were failing mid-mission, and pilots were dying without ever knowing why. They banned her test first. Then, the planes started disappearing, and when the truth finally surfaced, it revealed something far more terrifying than enemy fire. The war was being lost from the inside. The factory floor never slept. Day and night, under humming lights and the constant metallic scream of rivet guns, aircraft rolled forward like sacrifices on a conveyor belt. Wings bolted, panels sealed. Engines mounted. Everything stamped, approved, ready, combat fit. Women in coveralls replaced men who had gone overseas. Their hands learned precision quickly. Tight tolerances, torque limits, safety wires. They worked fast. Too fast, some said. Mistakes were inevitable, or so command believed. She stood apart from the noise. Not younger, not louder, not impressive at first glance. She had no engineering degree, no command rank, no authority, except an unusual habit of staring at aircraft longer than anyone else. She didn't trust what she couldn't feel. While inspectors checked measurements and signatures, she ran her fingers along seams, fasteners, access panels. She tapped metal, listened, watched reflections bend across curved surfaces, and then she started drawing lines. Thin, straight pencil marks across rivet rows, over inspection plates, along control surfaces. One continuous stroke, like a signature that wasn't meant to be seen again. Supervisors noticed. They told her to stop. She didn't, because 2 days later, a fighter came back damaged, but not by enemy fire. The pencil line was broken. Not chipped, not scratched, shifted. Something had moved beneath sealed metal, something that inspection sheets had missed. She checked another aircraft, and another. More broken lines. She marked her findings quietly. Logged tail numbers. Times. Assembly crews. Then, a bomber failed during a test climb. Control stiffened suddenly. The pilot fought it. Barely landed. Maintenance opened the panel. A washer, wrong size, jammed inside a control linkage. Too small to be an accident. Too precise to be negligence. The room went silent. Command blamed rushed labor. Union heads blamed exhaustion. Everyone blamed everyone. Except her, because she had 6 more tail numbers, and every single one had broken pencil lines. She requested a full inspection halt. They denied it. She asked to demonstrate her method. They laughed. A pencil test? One officer said. We're fighting a war, not drawing pictures. The order came down that afternoon. No unauthorized markings on aircraft. No unapproved inspection procedures. Her pencil was confiscated. Her notebook taken. She was reassigned to a corner station, out of the way. 3 days later, 2 aircraft never returned from training flights. No mayday. No combat. Just silence. Wreckage showed no enemy damage. Internal failure. Command panicked. They reopened inspection records and found something chilling. Both aircraft had been on her list. The pencil lines erased before delivery. Someone had noticed. Someone had been watching. When counterintelligence finally moved, they didn't announce it. They didn't shut down the plant. They watched. And what they discovered over the next week would confirm the impossible. Sabotage was happening in plain sight. Bolts shaved just enough to loosen at altitude. Washers swapped. Safety wires clipped and retwisted poorly. Control cables nicked so they'd snap under stress. Small things. Invisible things. Things designed not to fail immediately, but eventually. The pencil line test had revealed something engineering couldn't. Movement. A flaw that changed over time. 18 aircraft were quietly pulled from the line. All 18 showed signs of deliberate sabotage. Not random. Not careless. Intentional. And suddenly, the pencil wasn't stupid anymore. It was evidence. But the most frightening question remained unanswered. Who had known to erase the lines? Because someone inside the factory understood exactly what she was doing, and they were trying to stop her. The ban was lifted quietly. The pencil returned. No ceremony. But she didn't celebrate, because war had just followed her into the factory. And now, every line she drew wasn't just a test. It was a target. The pencil came back without apology. No paperwork. No announcement. It simply appeared on her workbench the next morning. Shorter now. Worn down, sharpened unevenly. Someone had tested it. Someone had understood its value. The factory felt different. Not louder, not quieter, heavier. Workers glanced at each other longer than necessary. Conversations ended when footsteps approached. Supervisors lingered too close to the inspection lines, pretending to study clipboards while actually watching hands. She noticed something else too. The sabotage had changed. Before, the defects were subtle but consistent. Wrong washers, clipped wires, shaved bolts. Now they were smarter. More patient. Designed to pass casual checks and fail only under combat stress. Someone had learned from her. She resumed drawing lines. Across elevator hinges. Across access panels. Along fuel line mounts. Always thin. Always straight. Always continuous. And every morning, she checked them. Most were intact. A few were not. The broken lines told stories engineering diagrams never could. A hairline shift. A millimeter of movement. Metal settling, where it should never settle. She marked 5 aircraft in 2 days. Then, counterintelligence finally spoke to her. Not in an office. In the cafeteria. They sat across from her like ordinary workers, drank weak coffee, and asked questions that sounded harmless until she realized what they were really asking. Who talked too much? Who watched inspections too closely? Who asked why instead of how? She answered carefully. Because she had already noticed something they hadn't. The sabotage wasn't random across shifts. It followed her pencil. Aircraft she marked were later targeted more aggressively. If a line revealed a hidden defect, that area would later show attempted correction. Clumsy, rushed, wrong. Someone was returning to erase her evidence. Not out of fear, out of urgency. That meant time was running out. She stopped drawing lines in obvious places. Instead, she began hiding them. Under access doors. Inside wheel wells. Along structural members visible only during deep maintenance. Lines only she would check. And that's when she found the worst one. A bomber cleared for overseas shipment. No prior issues. Perfect paperwork. Multiple inspections signed off. Her pencil line, drawn secretly inside a wing cavity, was broken clean through. The metal had flexed, but not from normal stress. A load-bearing rib had been partially cut. Just enough to weaken it, not enough to collapse immediately. At altitude, under combat load, it would have torn open the wing. Everyone on board would have died. She didn't report it immediately. She waited. Counterintelligence did the same. They let the bomber remain on the line. They watched. And late that night, when most of the factory was quiet, someone returned. They didn't wear a uniform. Didn't carry tools openly. Didn't rush. They moved like someone who had done this many times before. They opened the same panel and froze because the rib was already exposed. The pencil line, intact this time, ran straight through the sabotage mark. Clean. Undeniable. The person tried to close the panel, and hands grabbed them from behind. What followed never made the papers. No headlines. No trials reported publicly. But the investigation widened fast. The saboteur wasn't alone. They never were. Some were ideological. Some were coerced. Some had families overseas being threatened. Others believed they were slowing a war they hated. None of that mattered when the evidence was laid out. 18 aircraft. 18 confirmed sabotage cases. Each one prevented by a pencil line that showed movement where there should have been none. Pilots never knew how close they had come to dying. They never would. The factory resumed its rhythm. Faster now. More careful. The pencil test was officially approved, but renamed. Sanitized. Filed under a technical designation so simple, it hid its origin. She wasn't mentioned. No medals. No commendations. Just a quiet transfer to another facility. Another line. Another pencil. Because the war wasn't ending yet, and somewhere else, someone was already trying again. The new factory looked cleaner. Too clean. Fresh paint on the walls. New warning signs. Perfectly arranged tool racks. It gave the illusion that nothing bad had ever happened there, and that was what unsettled her most. This plant worked on aircraft already proven in combat. Veterans of the sky. Machines that had survived flak, fighters, storms. They came here not to be built, but to be rebuilt, damage repair. Overhauls, modifications, which meant every aircraft that passed through carried a history and a future. She was given a small inspection desk near the back, away from supervisors. No fanfare, no briefing, just a stamped document authorizing her to use supplemental surface alignment verification, the sanitized name for the pencil. She knew what that meant. They wanted results without attention. The first week, she found nothing. Lines stayed intact. Surfaces held steady. Control housings remained true. Either the sabotage hadn't reached here, or it had evolved again. Then she noticed something strange. Aircraft that should have shown stress didn't. Panels recently repaired after combat damage showed no microshifts. Rivets under high vibration zones looked untouched. Too perfect. War didn't leave things perfect. She drew a line across a newly replaced inspection panel on a fighter's nose. Another along a fuel access plate. Then she waited. The next morning, both lines were intact, but the panel screws had been removed and replaced. Someone had accessed the interior without disturbing the surface alignment. That meant internal tampering. More dangerous. Harder to detect. Almost impossible without disassembly. She changed tactics again. Instead of long straight lines, she began using paired marks, 2 parallel pencil strokes spaced precisely apart. Any torsion, any twist would change the distance between them. On the third day, one pair moved. Barely. Less than a millimeter. Inside the aircraft, they found a hydraulic line rerouted just enough to rub against a structural brace. Not leaking, not pinched, but under prolonged vibration, it would wear through. Gradually, silently. A delayed death. Counterintelligence returned, but this time, their faces weren't calm. This wasn't one person anymore. It was a network. Small changes. Shared knowledge. Different hands doing different steps. No single person touching enough of the aircraft to raise suspicion. A perfect system for sabotage. The pencil exposed them anyway. By the end of the month, 12 more aircraft were grounded. Total, 30. 30 crews who never knew their aircraft had been marked for failure. Rumors spread among workers. They whispered about the woman with the pencil, about planes that vanished overnight, about men escorted out quietly, never to return. Fear replaced carelessness, and fear made people sloppy. One night, she found a message scratched into the wood beneath her desk. Stop drawing lines. No signature, no threat, just a statement. She didn't respond. She drew more, because now she understood something crucial. The pencil test didn't just detect sabotage. It provoked it. Every line she drew forced the enemy to react, to reveal themselves by trying to undo what they didn't fully understand. Her method wasn't just inspection anymore. It was bait. And the war inside the factory was reaching its most dangerous phase. By now, everyone understood something was wrong. Not officially, not on paper, but in the way supervisors double-checked locks, in the way guards lingered longer near exits, in the way aircraft were rolled out under tarps instead of open air. The factory had become a battlefield without gunfire, and she was standing in the center of it, armed with nothing but a pencil and patience. The message under her desk was gone the next morning, scraped away, sanded down, cleaned too thoroughly. That told her more than the threat itself ever could. Someone had come back to check if it scared her. Someone was watching how she reacted. So she changed again. She stopped drawing lines where sabotage had happened. She began drawing lines where it would make no sense. Places no saboteur should ever touch. Non-critical panels. Dummy housings. Redundant systems. Traps. And 2 days later, one of those lines broke. Not by movement. By erasure. A deliberate attempt to rub it out. Someone had tried to remove evidence where no evidence should have mattered. That narrowed the field. Only someone actively tracking her pencil marks would do that. Counterintelligence tightened the net quietly. Shift rotations altered. Tool access logged. Scrap bins monitored. And then came the incident that nearly killed her. Late evening. Most of the floor dark. She was finishing a final check before leaving when she heard metal shift behind her. Not machinery, not settling steel. Footsteps. She turned. No one. But her pencil, lying flat on the desk, rolled slowly toward the edge. Someone had bumped the table. She stepped back. A wrench clattered to the floor behind the wing she'd been inspecting. This time, she didn't call out. She waited. A shadow moved. And in that second, short, terrifying, silent, she understood the real danger. Sabotage was no longer enough. She had become the variable they couldn't control. Guards arrived fast. Too fast for coincidence. Someone had already raised an alarm. The official report said misunderstanding. A worker in the wrong area. A dropped tool. No charges. But that night, she was escorted home. And the next morning, her role changed permanently. She no longer worked alone. Every inspection she conducted was mirrored by someone else. Every line documented. Every aircraft she flagged opened completely. No shortcuts allowed. The saboteurs tried one last time. A transport aircraft scheduled to carry wounded soldiers back from Europe. Not fighters. Not bombers. Evacuation. They compromised a latch on a cargo door. Subtle, clever, deadly. The pencil caught it. The door was tested. It failed instantly. At altitude, it would have blown out, taking men, equipment, and balance with it. That was the breaking point. The arrests came fast after that. Not dramatic. Not public. Men and women removed separately. Questioned separately. Evidence laid out piece by piece. Some confessed quickly. Others broke when shown photographs of the pencil lines they thought no one would ever notice. The full number was never announced. But the confirmed sabotaged aircraft reached 18. Exactly what her first instinct had warned her about before anyone listened. The pencil line test was no longer mocked. It was no longer debated. It was standardized, copied, distributed to other plants under different names, her name never attached, and that was intentional. Because heroes attract attention, and attention, in wartime, gets people killed. The war outside would rage on for months. Inside the factories, something had already changed forever. Inspection was no longer just measurement. It was intuition, stillness, the understanding that the smallest mark, drawn by a quiet hand, could mean the difference between a safe landing and an unmarked grave. After the arrests, the factory went quiet, but not calm. There is a difference. Machines still ran. Aircraft still moved down the line. Paperwork still piled up. But the sense of certainty, the belief that danger always came from outside, was gone forever. Now everyone knew the truth. The enemy had walked these floors, shared lunch tables, signed inspection sheets, and sometimes smiled. She was transferred again. No explanation, no farewell. Just an envelope with orders and a train ticket. The kind of movement that meant someone important had decided she was too valuable to lose and too visible to keep in one place. The new assignment was worse, not because of sabotage, because of consequences. This facility handled aircraft that had already failed in combat and survived. Planes that returned with stories written in bullet holes, shrapnel scars, and bent frames. Crews had trusted them once and nearly paid for it. Now those machines came here to be declared safe again. Or not. She realized something on her first day. Her pencil could save lives, but it could also ground aircraft desperately needed at the front. Every broken line meant a delay. Every delay meant someone else flying an older plane. Every older plane meant higher risk. Command began asking difficult questions. Are you sure this matters? Could this wait? Is the movement within tolerance? The pencil didn't argue. It just showed the truth. And the truth was uncomfortable. She flagged a transport with subtle fuselage warping near a repair seam. Engineers insisted it was within margin. Pressure came quietly, from schedules, from urgency, from the unspoken understanding that the war didn't pause for perfection. She refused to clear it. The aircraft was opened anyway. Inside, they found stress fractures spreading from a hidden rivet line, damage masked by a rushed field repair months earlier. At altitude, it would have failed. Again, no announcement. Again, no credit. But the tension grew. Some pilots began requesting pencil-checked aircraft by name, unofficially. Quietly. Word spread faster among flyers than through command channels. And that made some people nervous, because the pencil wasn't just exposing sabotage anymore. It was exposing systemic pressure. Shortcuts. Assumptions. The cost of speed over safety. Not everyone wanted that exposed. She received another message. This time not scratched wood or erased lines. A folded note slipped into her coat pocket. You're slowing the war down. That night, she didn't go home right away. She stayed late and drew more lines than ever before. Not because she wanted to catch someone, but because she understood the final, most dangerous truth of her method. The pencil line didn't lie. And in wartime, truth is often treated as an obstacle. By the time winter arrived, the pencil test had quietly spread across multiple facilities, each with different names, different procedures, different forms. But the idea was the same. Look for what moves when it shouldn't. Trust what your hands and eyes tell you, not just what paperwork promises. By war's end, no one remembered who first drew the line. That was by design. Because the legacy of the pencil wasn't a person. It was a change in thinking. And that change saved lives long after the factories fell silent. By the time the war began to turn, the factories felt older. Not in years, but in scars. Air raids no longer felt distant. Names of fallen pilots appeared on notice boards. Everyone understood that every aircraft leaving the line carried human weight inside it. And the pencil lines kept appearing. Not everywhere. Not always, but often enough to matter. She was no longer the only one drawing them. Others had learned. Not the technique exactly, but the mindset. They watched surfaces differently. Felt vibration paths. Questioned things that had always been fine before. That scared command more than sabotage ever had. Because sabotage could be hunted. Doubt could not. Late one evening, an officer finally asked her the question no one had wanted to say out loud. How many planes do you think failed before you started? She didn't answer right away. Because there was no number. There were only absences. Crews that never came back. Wreckage blamed on weather. Failures written off as bad luck. The pencil had not created safety. It had revealed how fragile safety always was. Near the end of the war, she was ordered to document her method formally. Not the pencil itself, but the philosophy behind it. The idea that systems should be tested for change, not just correctness. She wrote carefully. No emotion. No stories. Just observations. Metal moves. People miss things. Small shifts become disasters. The report was filed, classified, and renamed. Her name appeared nowhere. When victory finally came, the factories didn't celebrate the way cities did. There were no parades on the floor. Just relief and exhaustion. The pencil was placed in a drawer. She was released from duty with a simple letter of thanks. No medals, no photographs, no speeches. Years later, long after the factories closed and the war became history, parts of her work quietly resurfaced. In aviation safety manuals, in failure analysis training, in quality control philosophy, engineers argued about tolerances, inspectors argued about paperwork, but the pencil line lived on, transformed into gauges, sensors, and stress indicators that all asked the same question: what changed since last time? She never gave interviews, never corrected stories, because by then, the truth no longer belonged to her. It belonged to every pilot who landed safely and never knew how close they'd come. In war, people remember weapons. They remember heroes. They remember explosions. They rarely remember the quiet moments, the thin lines, the small acts that stop disaster before it happens. But sometimes, a pencil line is louder than a gunshot. After victory, silence replaced urgency. Factories emptied. Machines powered down. The smell of oil and hot metal lingered like a ghost that refused to leave. People went home carrying years of pressure in their bones, unsure how to live without deadlines measured in lives. She stayed, not because she was ordered to, but because someone had to close the loop. Aircraft returned from overseas in pieces. Some were scrapped. Some studied. Some dissected like bodies on an operating table. Engineers wanted answers now, not speed. Why did this one fail here? Why did that control surface bind only after hours of flight? Why did a repair hold for weeks and then suddenly give way? She didn't need instruments to know where to look. She drew lines. On wreckage. On fragments pulled from crash sites. On bent frames twisted by forces no test stand could recreate. Again and again the pencil showed the same thing. Tiny movements that had started small and grown deadly. The same patterns she had seen before anyone believed her. Only now, no one laughed. Reports began to change language. Instead of within tolerance, they wrote, subject to dynamic shift. Instead of no fault found, they wrote, cause undetermined, monitor change. That was the real victory, not that sabotage had been stopped. Not that planes flew better, but that certainty had died. Certainty had killed too many people. One afternoon, months after the war officially ended, a young engineer asked her why the test had been banned in the first place. She thought about it for a long time before answering. Because it didn't give comfortable answers. The pencil didn't confirm designs. It challenged them. It implied that systems could fail, even when everyone did their job correctly. That was terrifying in wartime, because it meant control was an illusion. People prefer enemies they can point at. The pencil pointed inward. Eventually, her work was absorbed into committees, procedures, training films. Her role dissolved the way quiet work always does, into the structure itself. She walked out of the factory for the last time with empty hands. No pencil, no badge. Just the knowledge that somewhere, years from now, a pilot would trust a machine that had been questioned properly. And never know why. But history has a way of distorting silence. Decades later, when war became documentaries and factories became museums, her story almost disappeared entirely. Reduced to footnotes, misattributed, romanticized incorrectly. Some said it was a myth. Some said it was exaggerated. Some said no single person could have made such a difference. They were wrong, because history doesn't change through grand gestures alone. Sometimes it changes through refusal. Refusal to sign off. Refusal to accept good enough. Refusal to stop drawing a line when someone tells you to. The pencil line test didn't win the war, but it exposed a truth the war had tried to bury. The smallest oversight, ignored long enough, can become fatal. And the smallest act of attention, repeated quietly, can save thousands. Years passed. Wars changed shape. Aircraft evolved. Metal turned to alloys, cables to hydraulics, hydraulics to electronics. Speed increased. Altitude climbed. Human error became more expensive than ever. And yet, the pencil never truly disappeared. It simply changed form. What began as a thin graphite line on cold aluminum became strain gauges, stress sensors, fatigue indicators. Computers measured what the pencil once revealed by instinct. But something was lost in the translation. Machines could measure movement. They could not notice it. That difference mattered. In post-war investigations, engineers kept encountering the same pattern. Aircraft that passed every test yet failed in real conditions. When analysts reconstructed the timeline, they always found one thing in common: change over time. Not immediate failure, not obvious damage. Gradual drift. The same thing the pencil had always caught. Quietly, training manuals began referencing an unnamed wartime inspection philosophy. Instructors taught inspectors to look for alignment changes, not just static compliance. To trust physical evidence over paperwork. Draw a mental line, they would say. Ask yourself, did anything move? No one mentioned where that idea came from, because institutional memory doesn't like individuals. It prefers systems. She lived long enough to see this, long enough to recognize her work reflected back at her under different names, long enough to understand that recognition would only dilute its power. Once, at an airshow decades later, she stood beneath a restored warplane, the same model she had once inspected under factory lights. Polished. Celebrated. Applauded. Children touched its fuselage. Veterans stared at it quietly. A guide spoke about bravery, technology, sacrifice. No one spoke about the thin line that once separated life from failure. She ran her fingers along the metal as the crowd passed. It was solid. It held. That was enough. Because the most dangerous part of war isn't the enemy you see. It's the flaw everyone agrees not to look for. And the reason her pencil line had once been banned wasn't because it was wrong. It was because it forced people to confront uncertainty at a time when certainty felt necessary for survival. By the time history was written, her name had faded. But the question she asked never did. What changed? That question, simple, uncomfortable, relentless, outlived the war itself. And that was the real legacy. The files stayed sealed for a long time, not because they contained secrets, but because they challenged a comforting myth. The myth that wars are won only by firepower. That safety is guaranteed by checklists. That failure is always loud. When the archives finally opened, historians found fragments. Memos without names, procedures without origins, a repeated phrase that appeared in different forms across different plants. Inspect for displacement over time. No credit, no author, just an idea that refused to die. In interviews, former inspectors spoke cautiously. They remembered being told to stop using unapproved methods. They remembered planes grounded for reasons no one wanted to explain. They remembered tension, fear not of bombs but of being wrong. One engineer admitted something decades later that chilled everyone who heard it. We had the data before the war ended. We just didn't like what it implied. Because what it implied was this: that the system itself, under pressure, creates the conditions for failure. That sabotage doesn't always need an enemy. That haste, fatigue, and certainty can be just as lethal. The pencil line had cut through all of that. It didn't accuse. It didn't argue. It didn't predict. It simply recorded truth. And truth, in wartime, is dangerous. As aircraft grew faster and more complex, accidents still happened. Investigators still asked the same questions. Somewhere, deep in the process, the old philosophy surfaced again and again. What moved that shouldn't have? What changed when no one was watching? The answer was rarely dramatic. It was almost always small. That's what made it terrifying, because it meant disaster didn't announce itself. It crept. The woman at the center of it all never corrected the record, never demanded acknowledgement. She understood something history often forgets. Impact does not require recognition. She had drawn lines on metal, but she had also drawn a line in thinking, between assumption and observation, between trust and verification. Long after the war faded into textbooks, pilots trusted machines that had been questioned properly. Investigators trusted change more than perfection. Inspectors learned to slow down when everything looked fine. And somewhere in that shift, unseen, uncelebrated, countless lives were spared. History remembers battles. It forgets prevention. But prevention is where the real victories hide. When the last wartime factories shut their doors, the pencil was already obsolete. At least on the surface, the world moved forward. Faster engines, pressurized cabins, electronics that could calculate stress in ways graphite never could. Engineers spoke the language of numbers now. Sensors replaced touch. Algorithms replaced instinct. And yet buried inside every serious safety protocol was the same silent question she had asked years earlier on a noisy factory floor. What changed since the last time we looked? That question ended the war for her. Not with victory celebrations or medals, but with closure. She understood, finally, why her test had frightened people so much. Because it suggested that danger doesn't always roar. It whispers. It shifts. It waits. 18 aircraft had been saved from deliberate sabotage, but thousands more had been protected from something harder to fight: complacency. The pencil line had exposed enemies hiding in the shadows of the system. But more importantly, it had exposed the system's own blind spots. When historians later tried to pinpoint a single moment when wartime aviation safety truly changed, they couldn't agree. There was no dramatic turning point, no famous order, no celebrated invention, just a gradual disappearance of certain kinds of accidents, failures that stopped happening, crashes that never occurred, pilots who landed and went home without ever knowing how close they had come to dying. That is how real victories look: quiet, unprovable, easy to ignore. The war ended. The files were archived. The pencil stayed in a drawer, But the line remained, drawn across history itself, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in war is not the one aimed at the enemy, but the flaw everyone is afraid to acknowledge. Wars are remembered for their battles, for explosions, for heroes and villains, but the deadliest threats are often invisible. They hide in routine, in urgency, in the belief that everything is already under control. This story was not about a weapon. It was not about glory. It was about attention, about a single thin line that revealed what an entire system refused to see until lives were almost lost. This is Dark War Records, where history isn't told to entertain. It's told to warn, because the next disaster never announces itself. It arrives quietly and waits for someone brave enough to notice what has changed.